Hello, everyone.
Hi.
So we're talking about some stories from the Parsha, some Chassidic stories that were mentioned in some Chassidic books, Chassidic storybooks of this Parsha, Parshat Naso. And the first story is called Three Advice. And it's about Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev. And so when Reb Levi Yitzchak was young, you remember who Reb Levi Yitzchak is, right? Reb Levi Yitzchak's nickname was the advocate of Am Yisrael, because whatever we did wrong, he came to the Kadosh Baruch Hu and said, find a way to look with a positive eye on Am Yisrael, which is very much a continuance of Moshe and Aaron also, who always find a way to excuse us in God's eyes. So he had quite a few daughters, and one of the students of Reb Levi Yitzchak, had quite a lot of daughters, and they were growing up. They were coming up with their to be adults, and he was seeing that he wasn't going to make enough money to marry them off, and on top of that, he was getting into deeper and deeper debt. And he didn't know how he was going to sponsor his family. So he couldn't find enough work in his town. So he had to go travel and find more work to provide for his family. He also had like a little inn, like a little kretschmer, they used to call it in Ukraine, which was like a little motel. And he was renting it. And he also owed a lot of money to his landlord. And the landlords back then in Russia, Ukraine, Poland, they could do some very aggressive stuff to Jews. Jews weren't allowed to own their own land. So it was only the Gentiles who were allowed to own the land and rent it out to Jews. So if you didn't have money to pay the landlord, it wasn't like they were going to sue you in court. It was more like very unpleasant stuff. So he didn't know what he would do. He would go away and he would tutor children. And for 12 years, he would travel the world until he collected enough money and decided that it was time for him to return home and marry off his daughters and return his debts. So on the way, he passed by Berdichev and he thought, oh, what a good opportunity to go and meet Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev. And Reb Levi Yitzchak was already quite famous in that time. And he came to Reb Levi Yitzchak and he prayed with him. And he was so impressed by Reb Levi Yitzchak that his soul completely, got connected to Reb Levi Yitzchak's soul. And he just couldn't move from him after the davening was over. And Reb Levi Yitzchak said hello to him and, introduced himself. And he said, why don't you come to me for breakfast? So he said, what a good idea. Thank you so much. And as they were eating and having a good time, Reb Levi Yitzchak tells him, I have 3 good stories to tell you. Are you interested in hearing my 3 stories? And but he says, for each story, you're going to have to pay me 300 rubles. And guess how much money he had after collecting money for 12 years?
1,200 rubles.
900 rubles. 900 rubles.
Do
right?
the math.
Right. So he admired at this point Reb Levi Yitzchak so much that he was like, okay. So he says, okay, tell me the stories. So he tells him the first story. And he gave him the first 300 rubles ahead. And Reb Levi Yitzchak tells him the first story is like this. It's not so much a story, it's more like an advice. He says, if you see people walking down the road, or if you walk down the road, and then there is like a crossroad, always take the right side of the road. Right? And always, don't ever take the left side of the road. Always take the right side of the road.
Interesting.
Right? That was the end of the story. And for that, he had paid 300 rubles.
All right.
Right? So he thought to himself, okay, what's the next story? So Rabbi Yitzchak says, do you want to hear the next story? He says, give me 300 rubles up head. So he gives him the another 300, and he tells him, and he's thinking, while he's giving it, he's already thinking to himself, I wonder what I'm going to hear now for the 300 after I worked for years for those 300. And he says to him, the next story is, if an old man marries a young woman, it's like marrying half a death.
Half a death?
Half a death.
Really? Half a death.
Yes,
if an older man marries
a younger woman.
Older or old?
Older.
Older.
Yeah, man marries a younger woman, like significantly young. It's like half a death, right? Unlike what a lot of people would consider normal. Okay? He says it's a half a death. So that's the second story, and he had given up 300 rubles. And then he says, would you like to hear the third story? Well, here's the 300 rubles. So the Melamed was thinking to himself, what have I heard so far that was worth 300 rubles? And how am I going to come home with 300 rubles left? I may as well start thinking what I'm doing with this, but who knows, And maybe the third story is at least going to give me some kind of like whatever, right? And maybe, and probably the Rebbe knows what he's saying. And he decided, anyway, I'm going to start thinking how I'm going to make more money. So this 300 ruble I'm left with is really not enough to go home with. What am I going to do now, right? Anyway, he says, okay. And he says to him, don't believe anything that people tell you until you see it with your own eyes. And may you be successful. Like, have a good life. And he goes away. Gave up all the 900 rubles. And he's on his way back home. He doesn't know what to do.
What does he
12
encounter
years
along the way?
12 years he worked so hard for those, and he gave it for 3 stupid, whatever, right? And what he's going to do with his family and children now and wife, and how is he going to marry his children? What kind of a face is he going to have in front of his wife and children? But he was trying to encourage himself that if the Rebbe said, the Rebbe knows, and it's going to be okay. So he goes down the road, and he encounters a group of people. They're thieves. They're not thieves. They're running after thieves that's stolen their stuff. And they ask him, have you seen a group of thieves here? And he says, yeah. And he remembers the first story the Rebbe tells him. And he says they went to the right side.
They went right?
The right. Stay on the right.
So they go to the right. They find the thieves. And they give him a nice portion that already covers basically all his, more than what he invested in that story. Right? And he's so happy, right? So he goes on and he comes to a little motel. And there's an old man there. And his wife is half his age. She's young and gentle and beautiful. And he asked to sleep in that motel. And the woman, the owner of the place, didn't want to give him a room. So he started searching for another motel. He searched and he couldn't find, and he came back to the little krejme, and the doors were already locked. And the rain was pouring, and he absolutely didn't know what he was going to do that night. And he saw like a little pergola, a little roof over somewhere by the house. And he just decided, this is the driest I can find for the night. And he lied down under that roof because he understood that nobody was opening them the door anymore. And he saw that the old man, the old owner of the house, was sleeping in a different room, and he was quite elderly and quite ill. And so he wasn't sleeping with his young wife. And suddenly he hears in the middle of the night, there is a carriage with people. They bang on the door, and she opens up the door for them. And they walk here and there, and he hears them whisper, did you see that, men lying outside on the floor, and maybe he heard our convention or our, discussions about our, what we're planning to do. And one of them says, nah, he's a complete drunkard and he's asleep. And even if he heard something, he wouldn't be paying attention and don't mind him, right? And they tried to push him and shove him a bit, and they see that he couldn't wake up. And he made himself, he heard them say what they said. So he made himself into looking a drunkard and to not minding anything. And after that, he heard them discussing how they were going to kill the owner of the house, the elderly man, with the help of the wife. And how she was basically plotting to kill him with their help, basically. So he remembered the second story from the Rebbe of Levi Yitzchak, that it's half a death. A young wife could be half a death. And he saw that he has nothing else to lose. So he made a lot of noise so that the elderly man woke up and his life was saved. And the murderers ran away. And he told the owner of the house the whole story. And the owner of the house was very grateful. And he said, how much do I owe you? He said, well, it cost me $300. I'm not going to take a dime more than that from you. So he said, give me $300 and the rest I'll receive in Olam Haba. So here he already had the whole sum for the whole 3 stories. And when he came back home, he started asking the community around. He pretended it wasn't him. And he started asking the community about his family. Do you know that family? How they're doing? What's up with them? And they told him, this family's kind of weird. The husband left 12 years ago. We've never seen him since then. And the woman was probably, he never left a letter to the wife and didn't write any letters in 12 years. And he had a little motel, a little kretschmer, a little bar. And he asked him, what about the wife? And nobody, people were kind of hesitant of telling him, but then they kind of said, whatever, he didn't write back, so she assumed that he's gone. And she had this lover for the last who knows how many years. So he remembered the third story. What was the third story? Don't believe anything until you see it with your own eyes. So he stayed there, by the house, looking at what's happening, and he saw really that every night a young man, a beautiful, young, handsome man, comes to the house, and they go into the room, and he leaves in the morning. So he made himself he came to the house and, he pretended that it wasn't him. And he wants a room, and he rented a room, and he stayed there, and he saw, and he is there's no two interpretations to this, So, and after 3 nights of saying that, he changed. He shaved his beard, he changed, he came back looking like himself, and he comes to the house, and he says, hi, and everybody jumps on him. Hi, how are you? We missed you so much. And his wife, my hubby, I missed you so much. And at some point, it was very difficult for him not to say to her, yeah, right, you missed me, right?
But he was
Or are you
12
kidding?
years, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But it doesn't justify it. Right?
I won't even go there. That'll stop.
Yeah, whatever. So, yeah, but you have to understand that back in the days,
yes, I know.
or in other cultures, right? Look at other cultures, the people who come here to work now for years and years, right? That's why we say, you have to go away. If you want to keep the relationship, you stay faithful. If you don't want to keep your relationship, it's understandable, but break it and release the
Yeah.
person, you know,
Right.
You know,
make
some
it legit.
Some
Yeah.
people marry, they don't.
Right,
I mean,
but
it's all
back in the
checked out, and
days-
they marry other people and
Right.
they keep it like
Right.
it's
Right.
legitimate and it's
Right.
not.
And back in the days, people didn't have much choice. It wasn't no internet, you know, writing a letter was even very complicated. It was like everything was so
It
complicated.
costs money.
Yeah. Anyway, so he tells her, you know, I've been here for the 3 last nights and I've seen what you were doing the whole time I was gone. So he said to him, she says to him, you silly, don't you recognize this is our son? You left when he was a baby and now he's a man.
See it with your own eyes.
Right.
Yeah.
So he understands that, you know, he was foolish, right? And she says to him, after you left, the pirates took away our son as ransom until you return and give him back the money. And my only way to protect our son to stay within Judaism was to tell him to come at night so I can learn Torah with him so that I can continue teaching him how to be a part of our community, part of a Torah existing community. And that's what I've been doing all night since you haven't been here. I've been studying with our son. So then she says, if you don't believe me, look for yourself. And he hides. And their son comes at night. And he goes in and he sees that, you know, they're studying and, you know, and their peace comes to the home. So basically the story is told about the pasuk that we were reading. זאת תורת הקנאות, איש אשר תעבור עליו רוח קנאה וקנא את אשתו. So this is the Torah of jealousy. Or in other words, when we say Torah, it's the word learning. This is the learning of jealousy. It's normal for us to be jealous, envious of our partners. But you have to open up your eyes and see things for what they really are. And when we're talking about the Sultan, the whole thing is we have to understand that sometimes we misinterpret situations. And we have to learn to look at them with open eyes, with real open eyes. This is one of the reasons why we say in the morning, Baruch atah Shem pokeach ivrim. May you open our eyes, because sometimes we see things for what they're not.
But it's an interesting story, except, I don't know, the husband was not a good husband, and he wasn't a good father. And he went away to collect money, you know.
But it was obviously a mutual decision.
You think that was a mutual decision?
Yeah, definitely. I think it was a mutual
That he
decision.
would be gone 12
Yeah,
years?
obviously she wasn't angry at him. You know, she knew that that's what needed to be done for their family. You know, and I think, you know, we look at everything. We look with a perspective of our own cultural times.
Yes.
Right? And it's good that we're living in such an abundant life and also in such a developed psychological state of mind that we understand that a couple need each other. And it's not only about being married. It is and it's not. That on one hand, we understand that a marriage is much more than a mutual financial commitment. I stay to raise the children, you go and make money, right? And in our days, it's completely different.
Well, we all know Jews who sent someone in their family from Eastern Europe to the U.S. to earn money to bring them all over, and it took years. So,
Right? And sometimes you couldn't communicate.
Right.
So, you know, obviously she wasn't angry at him, just like Rachel, Rabbi Akiva's wife. Not only she wasn't angry at him, and their situation was a bit different. She said, go and learn Torah. But also she didn't hear from him for 12 years. So,
I don't know, it's a strange story.
I
But
know.
it's about, you know, giving people the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
All these stories are interesting because they show us what Jewish culture is about.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
We're very quick to judge today.
Yeah, we are.
And we think we know
That's
everything.
right.
I think
Right.
it's also because everything's so easy to judge too, because everything's like with cameras and pictures and It's just so instant. But I was gonna say also with the story, Chavetz Chaim talks about that with like the laws of Shmir Hashem. So like even if like let's say somebody tells me something and I saw with my own eyes what they said and I know it to be true, it's like halacha they are also supposed to not fully believe because you don't know the whole story. Even if you saw something with your own eyes, you can't take everything into your heart.
Right.
That's for two witnesses. And for something to go before the Beit Din, it has to have two witnesses, is my understanding. Is that correct?
Right. Two witnesses is one thing.
And they can't agree. They can't give the same story.
And when somebody's supposedly dead, we can't judge them dead until we know for sure they're dead, to nullify the marriage, to count them as a widow, so that they can move on with their lives.
That's why
Sometimes
soldiers write the letter before they go in.
Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's wrong. There are different situations. We have to, I think, like, one thing we have to understand when we're reading the Chassidic stories, we have to put them in the context of the historical times. That's one thing. And the second thing is that when we're talking about the sota, as much as we're talking about the sinning, but we're also talking about the wrong or the misconception of the story. It's not about only if she sinned. It's actually about a situation when she hasn't sinned and we want to prove her. It's more like a polygraph.
It's great.
The ritual
I
of
think the Sota thing is great.
It's like the ancient polygraph.
Yeah, I mean, it gives us the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
And if you have a jealous husband and you drink the waters, who cares? Because you'll be okay.
Right.
And your husband will see you be okay.
And how many times you see, like, without insulting anybody, but like really you see it very often that it could go both ways, that not only, the husband, sometimes the wife could be jealous also unlegitimately, where there was no act of harm has been done. And we need to think about that. How many times this is, I think, why it's called, this is the Torah of jealousy. Remember that sometimes we're just jealous for no reason. And
for no reason?
For no reason.
I think you always have a reason if you're jealous. It's not necessarily a valid reason.
Okay.
But you have a motivation.
Right. You could discuss, like, I think yes.
Hi.
Hello.
Oh, hello.